Okay, warning about Mandi's podcast. We are going to get into some advanced concepts here. So if you are new to the podcast, if you're new to object-oriented UX, let this one kind of just wash over you so that you can hear what is possible and the kind of complexity taming that is available to you. But you are likely not going to understand everything. Even seasoned OOUXers are going to need to hit that 15-second back button likely a few times. So if you're brand new to OOUX, I highly recommend you go and check out my free training that gives you 20 strategies on how to level up in UX. And those 20 strategies are all oriented around the ORCA process. That's objects, relationships, calls to action, and attributes. This is the how of OOUX. All right, so go to OOUX.com/level up and you'll be able to get there. And FYI, I'm going to be delivering this free training live multiple times on March 25th and 26th. So save those dates if you want to come live. And if you're on my email, you'll get an invite. Okay, back to the podcast. Definitely stick with this one because there is so much gold in here, especially if you are interested in game design. So Mandi is an OOUXer working at Autodesk, specifically in the department that works on all the 3D modeling programs that the majority of video game designers use today. So when she is thinking about OOUXing video games, she's not just coming from the angle of a player, sort of exercising her OOUX chops. She's doing that, but she's also thinking about the game designer and modeler roles as well. We really focus on base objects and extensions, but we also get into how OOUX is just a lifesaver when it comes to documentation and literally just note-taking when you're on a complex project. And we also talk about how to start building a community of practice at your organization. Make sure to pay attention as well around minute 30. Mandi has a challenge for you to practice OOUX that I absolutely love. So come on with me into the weeds. I am so excited to introduce you to Mandi Geiselman, Advanced OOUXer and our star mentor from cohort 11. If you're looking to level up your UX, content, or product design practice to confidently and joyfully tackle complexity, ask the million-dollar questions, and design digital systems that actually work, you are so in the right place. Welcome to the UX Level Up podcast. I'm Sophia Prater, and for over a decade, I've been teaching professionals how to make the most valuable and often invisible parts of UX gloriously visible. We will untangle the structure beneath the surface before jumping into screens, saving time, money, and headaches, and having so much fun doing it. Together, let's UX collaboration, break down silos, and build shared understanding that sets everyone up for success. Let's become the systems thinkers that our teams, and quite honestly, the world, are so desperately craving. Let's level up our practice and redefine what it means to be a UX designer. Let's jump into it. Mandi Geiselman, welcome to the UX Level Up podcast.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm so excited to be here. It's been like, how long have you been trying to get me on here? Like 6 months?
Probably about 6 months. I mean, ever since you did your talk on, I was like, oh, we need to go more into this, which is what we're going to be doing here. So Mandi, you are a senior UX designer at Autodesk.
Yep.
Doing really complicated stuff. And I love hearing about the kind of things that you work on there. Can you just tell everybody what kind of things do you work on?
So this is probably the best job I've ever had. I get to work with some incredibly smart people from a lot of different backgrounds. I work in our interactive and media and entertainment division. So doing product design for things like Maya, 3ds Max, and other plugins and platform software related to the entertainment and media industry. So interactive games, movies, TV shows, special effects simulation, things, very, very complicated processes just in their own niches of a larger industry, plus like the work we do, which is for very specific people within those niches within that industry.
So you deal with objects like, I think one of the objects that you've mentioned before is node.
Yeah. Yeah,
like,
I know.
Like literally like the pieces in the graphics programs.
Yeah. So you might have like a node graph editor, and that's like graph interfacing. So node graph interfaces. So we design node graph interfaces in one of the plugins for Maya. So yeah, you're working with a node that represents, it's an abstraction that represents a piece of code that does something, but the user is looking at a visual representation of the code, not the actual code.
That's amazing. We're actually here. We want to talk about OUXing video games, which is, I mean, actually just OUXing games is something that kind of like pops up periodically within the community. Like I've thought about it a lot. I've designed games using OUX. I've also thought about like, ooh, like game instructions would be so good to OUX because game instructions are always so bad. So I've like,
Yeah.
when I'm playing a new board game, I'm always like, okay, tell me, let's define all the pieces here. Okay, now how do all the pieces relate to each other? Like, do not read me the directions, especially when somebody's teaching it to me. I'm like, okay, tell me about these pieces. Okay, how does this piece relate to that piece? Okay, what can I do to all these pieces? And then I kind of like dig into the attributes of the different pieces. And it's like, it's a great way to understand anything. But I basically just described the Orca process, right? I'm like, what are the objects in the system? How do they relate to each other? What are the CTAs? What can I do to each, like, what can I do to that deck? What can I do to those little chips? What can I do to that piece? What about these little pieces on the board? So kind of like what was your inspiration to be like, ooh, I'm going to do this OUX talk for the community. Let me see if I can apply OUX. What was it to Forbidden Horizon West,
Horizon Forbidden West. Yeah,
Horizon Forbidden West. Yeah.
Yeah. The reason I chose Horizon Forbidden West was because at the time I play about once a year now, but it's one of my favorite video games to go back to. And I think they've done a really great job with their video game UX design. But so that was part of it, is I wanted to just explore how OUX and games could align because, it came up in our cohort and like we had talked about it. So I was like, okay, let me just explore this. And this is a game I'm playing. It's kind of how it started. And then it became, as I started digging into it, it got more and more interesting because you think like, oh, like with some games, like board games, you have this like top level of objects, and then you might have these more abstract objects, like the goal of the game. But with video games, you have like an object that might be a resource, and it's got both like a concrete, and I think I called it an environmental object versus like a gameplay object. And then you have game world representation versus abstract representation. So like your object is a resource, but that resource, like one that's a healing resource versus a resource that might cause damage in one state but not in another, those have to be treated differently in the game world. And then like when you get into the like abstract representation, so where am I seeing that item in menus, that object might not actually visually look like it does in the game world because you're trying to save space.
Yeah.
So you might have like a generic image that you're using in your gameplay menus for like resources. So, which might be just like a pile of objects that an artist put together and it looks really nice, but that's the same image you're seeing every time you go through your like inventory, but the icon is different. So you still have this matching, so the icons are different. So all of your resources are still defined differently. You have this need to be very discretionary about where those deviations going to occur. So like they are very conservative in games about creating what we call shape-shifting objects. Like they don't want to do that because you're trying to save space, and that like every bit of space counts on a game.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about this is like what just occurred to me. I mean, this may have occurred to me before, but it just reoccurred to me is like how much this also has a corollary to virtual reality.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have it the same way you talk about the game space and then like the menu, the user interface space. It's kind of the same in virtual reality where you have like your virtual reality and then you have like your heads up display. You have the information about the virtual reality. And
Yeah.
so if it's like a tool, a resource that you're using, a sword or something like that,
Yeah.
and then the sword has all this conditional logic. Oh, you can use it on this enemy, but not on that type of
Yep.
enemy. And you can only use the sword when you're above water. You can't use it underwater. So it has all these
Right.
conditions. And the sword is a type of resource. So it's kind of like we got a little bit of like a base object, maybe with the sword extension on
Yeah.
it, getting into
And then
some power
you
play territory.
and then you also have potential conditions that are tied to the players, like levels or abilities that are unlocked, if there's any kind of system of wear and tear, like all of these other things that are attributes of an object that
Aw.
visually show. They might be visually represented on a sword. You might have one that looks fresh, and then as you use it, it starts to deteriorate visually. And
Okay.
that's telling the user without looking at the heads up display, hey, your sword is about to break because it looks like it's about to break.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't,
The
yeah, it's relying a lot on that real world like recognition of what does something look like when it wears. And so you're not having to design it too much, you're having to reflect it.
Right. And I mean, it's like you're reflecting a status attribute.
Yeah.
So that's so interesting. And like there's this other thing with gameplay, which is so different than like there's all these corollaries. There's a Venn diagram between UX and game design, right? Because
Yeah.
also like when you think about hidden rules, like hidden rules where like, oh, you can't use the sword underwater, for example. Like in UX, you do not want any hidden rules. Like hidden rules are the worst, where it's like,
Yeah.
I can't use it on this page. I can't do this thing over here. Like, oh, because of some sort of hidden rule that I need to use a bunch of deductive reasoning to figure out.
Yeah.
But in games, like hidden rules are freaking cool. You
Yeah.
like
And they're,
kind of like want to have some hidden rules. And if you give it all away, then like, where's the game? You kind of need to
yeah.
explore and find things out for yourself.
Yeah, and that's like part of the discussion and some of the discourse around UX and games is, does UX make games easier? And it doesn't.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's a
Ooh,
very
yeah.
fine line of like, because UX is typically and historically been something that is for creating the best user experience, which almost always has translated to easiest, smoothest, least number of
Mhm.
clicks, any of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff that's like actually not what UX is about. And like the best user experience in a game is that you reach that flow point of being both challenged and having fun. And so, of
Mhm.
course, a UX designer who knows that is the goal isn't going to make it super easy. But what you
Right.
do want is for the objects in your system to be recognizable and the rules to be understandable so that the user
Yeah.
in the player, in this case, in this reality, can quickly understand, like, they can try to swipe their sword underwater and nothing's going to happen. Okay. All right. That's
Yeah.
easy. I found that out. Like, there's so much hidden logic, like we said, for games that even is just not even like, not even what the user has to think about, but it's putting into how believable is this world.
Yes, you want to make the world believable.
Yeah.
And there is such a corollary there with UX design where like when we talk about a lot in OOUX, the laws of physics and like
Yeah.
when I go into, when I click into this space, if I hit the back or the return, I expect to like go back to the space I was just in. Things like that is just like one example. We have jumped straight into the weeds. I'm going to back up just for a second because some people, if you're still with us here, if you're like completely new to the UX Level Up podcast and you're like, wait a second, I just want to level up my UX. What is this OOUX thing even? What does that even mean? So that is object oriented UX. So like, let's just I want to go back down in the weeds, but let's like take it back up for a second.
Yeah.
So
Sounds
Mandi, and
good.
by the way, you're not just a senior UX designer at Autodesk, you're also an advanced OOUX strategist too. So
Yeah.
you've been through the certification program and then you cohort 11, right? You
Yeah.
just did your mentorship, right?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, time is hard. So cohort
Yeah.
11 you were a mentor during cohort 11 and you were our star mentor too. You're
Yeah,
much
that's a
much
surprise.
loved mentor. Yes, yes. So many like beautiful testimonials and you were just such a gem for your pod of mentees. And so you got your
Enjoyed
advanced
having them.
certification too.
Yeah.
What's that? You enjoyed
I
them?
enjoyed having, they were so great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had a good pod. So shout out to Mandi's pod. So I'm going to actually pop this over to you. Like, how do you explain OUX? Like, for the people in here who are like, what is this OUX thing? I just want to level up my UX practice. How would you explain OUX to them?
So to me, object-oriented UX is like, I usually just start with the definition, right? It's a way of looking at not just user experience, but anything from a object-oriented lens, which is the way humans think. And it's about creating and ensuring that the virtual experience, if it's a UX, virtual experience, but for anything, whether it's a story or a game, that it is connecting with the user in the way that they understand and that they can innately look at this virtual environment and know how to navigate it, or at least understand the cues that will allow them to. Human-centered design has become such a buzzword right now, and it's like so important right now of thinking of these object-oriented experiences, because we are so focused on the interface experience and the tactile, like, where is this happening on a phone or on a like watch or on a through ChatGPT. It's not about where, it's about making sure that your objects and the system you're building is evergreen, regardless of what the interface is.
Exactly. So when I was working at CNN, we had there was a mobile team and then there was a desktop team. It's like the teams were actually divided by what the platform was.
There's
And it's
so
like
many
the
places
objects
like
are the
that.
same. Like it's like we're all coming into the same thing. And that's why it's so beautiful that you can have this object map, and the object map, the same exact object map can inform the admin experience. It can inform the kiosk experience. It can
Yeah.
inform the AI, of course. It can inform the mobile app. It can inform all three mobile apps. But it's like you're all kind of singing from one sheet of music because it's all the same objects, and some objects might be prioritized differently depending on what role or maybe even like what part of the experience it is, but it's the environment, right? So
Right.
yeah, cool, amazing. Hey, sorry to interrupt. One quick reminder: if all of this is sounding good, what you just listened to about object-oriented UX, but you're still new to OUX, head over to OUX.com/level up and get the free training that'll get you up to speed on how this is going to help you level up in UX. So I loved your testimonial from from when you first got certified. So I'm going to read it here, and I have a question for you about it.
Okay.
Okay, so you said, before I was introduced to OUX, I honestly didn't think I wanted to practice UX design anymore. I was getting really burnt out trying to keep track of everything happening all at once and being the one person on a team that was thinking, when we pull this string, what other things will unravel? I was tired of all the rework, reprioritization, and miscommunication that is rampant in the UX field. I was drowning in OUX, and the Orca process felt like a life preserver. So tell me a little bit about how your beautiful brain works and why like keeping track of all the things and like being that person, be like, wait a second, if we pull this thread, like it's gonna unravel all the stuff over there. Like, why did that feel like drowning for you?
So part of this was that I didn't have a way of communicating how I worked. So object-oriented UX was very close to the way I was thinking, and it gave me a framework to build off of. And something, because even to this day, I'm like, it's gotten better. But at the point that I was quoting that, I had a Miro board for like, it was this giant Miro board that was all of my notes for an entire project for the entire 2 years I had been working on it. And it's like, I had just recently had to hand it off to somebody, and I was like, shit, this is like, this is it. This is all of the information about the project.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, I am the only one who knows how to read this. No one else is going to read this, even if I tell them to. I wouldn't want
Hmm.
to read this. When you're the one that makes the artifact, you know all of the things about it. So you're keeping this Rolodex of all of the things in your head, but you're the only one who's able to do that and who is doing that. So being able to use object-oriented UX to create artifacts that were shareable so that I could document a moment in time or a structure in time to be able to pass off to somebody or to future Mandi. Like, that was incredibly
Future
useful.
Mandi. Yeah.
Yeah, future Mandi. Oh my gosh, future Mandi is like rolling because like past Mandi did so much OUX for a
Yeah.
project and like was able to hit the ground running a year and a half later because like the object map only had to be updated.
Yeah.
Like that, like
Totally.
amazing. But if anybody else had taken on that project instead of me, it still would have had this like, crap, I'm still the only person that knows some of this stuff. So
Yeah.
it's again coming back onto this project is like, okay, now we have to like get better and better at our documentation. But when you're that only person who knows everything, and you just don't have like either you have a really weird way of writing it down or you don't write it down and you just keep it in your head, it's not doing anyone any good, and then you're the one that's drowning in
Yeah.
and no one can
I,
help you.
I
Like,
think I think Rebecca Wall called it like a file folder for her brain. Something
yeah,
like it's like now I know like where to put all of these things.
yeah,
And then if you need to onboard somebody else or re-onboard yourself, which happens so much where like you get pulled on another project and you get pulled back on this project, then you just have to look at you have that x-ray vision, right? You look at the
right,
object map and you're like, oh yeah, okay. And then those requirements are all attached in context,
right,
which is
yeah,
really, really nice. Now, you do not identify as a fully neurotypical person, right?
no.
No. Okay. So talk a little
No.
bit about that and like how OUX, was helpful
Yeah.
with the way that, again, like with the way that your brain works.
So yeah, like I mean, like I tell everyone, I think like neurotypical neurodiversity is a spectrum, and it's been dominated by one end for sure. But I think with object-oriented UX, and like I said before, it provided this framework that helped me communicate the way I was already kind of thinking, but it gave like a structure to it. So it went from being this like it's almost like when you make a pinch pot versus like a like pot on a wheel.
Yeah.
It's like
Okay.
you know how to like make the pot and it does the job, but it's way better when you have a structure to it. So like
And tools to do
a
it,
tools,
right? A better
yeah.
tool, a more
Yeah,
advanced
so
tool. You can make a pinch pot all day long, but
yeah.
like,
And so
that's a great metaphor.
I started using it for work, but then like I've also started using it in hobbies and other things of just like how just helping me understand things, and even like my partner's like points out you're doing OUX again, or like, oh, are you trying to OUX the grocery list or something, like
Did you try to
it's
OUX the grocery list?
no.
What is like a weird, funny thing that you've tried to OUX?
I think it was when I started using OUX to frame out my D&D character's backstory,
Nice.
and he was like, are you using OUX for a backstory character, like for a character backstory that's not even like UX? I was like,
You can use it
yes,
for anything.
you can
Anything
use
that's
it for
like
anything.
anything that's like structured information. You need to like figure out how to structure information.
Yeah,
We did an OUX happy hour years ago when we talked about OUXing fiction and like how to do it for like whether it's character dossiers, but then you can think about how characters and objects within the story relate to each other. You could do a nested object matrix for that.
yeah,
You could totally do that for game design too.
yeah. And even when you get
Okay.
into like character relationship mapping
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
NPCs and stuff, yeah.
Ooh. Okay, so let's go back. So you did the advanced masterclass, learned all these like so there's the masterclass and then there's the advanced masterclass because even though the masterclass is like a ridiculous beast of a course, this is a rabbit hole and it's a fractal and there was like stuff that we couldn't even fit in. So now we have the spillover advanced masterclass that the mentors go into. So you learned some stuff there that you were like, ooh, that kind of would change how I would do this Horizon Forbidden West OUXing of the video game.
Yeah.
So say more about that.
So there's like a question you asked me that has literally been haunting me ever since
Uh-oh.
that. And it was when you asked like about the machines, is it a tree system or do you think it's a base?
Okay.
And
Okay.
I said tree system. I doubled down
Uh-huh.
on it. And I
Yeah.
really want to go back and say it's a base and extensions. and that
Okay.
it potentially has a tree of like like a template versus actual. When we were talking about extensions and like type extensions, I was like
Hmm.
the back of my mind like started itching, and I was like, man, something that's
Uh,
weak to acid is always going to be weak to acid. Like acid is always going to be strong against certain things. So like you kind of want to define and be able to test as a designer acid, and whether acid is overpowered against ice or miasma or something. Like, so that type, like elemental type, would be a part of the extension. There'd probably have to be
yes.
two extensions. It'd be one of those like a base with two extensions, or has two
Okay, so we need to
extensions.
explain bases and extensions. So, and also just to back up, like for people who have not seen Masterclass 3.0. So this is not only in the advanced Masterclass. We talk about this in the Masterclass 3.0. That is the latest iteration of the OUX Masterclass. So if you were in a previous version and you now have access to Masterclass 3.0, you always get all the upgrades for life. So you have access to that, but you might know this as object bases and derived objects. And this is one of the big things we shifted a lot around in Masterclass 3.0, like just kind of solidified things, locked things in, codified pieces that were a little bit fuzzy. And this is one of the pieces that like got a big upgrade. So now we call them base objects and extensions. And basically what this is the base object is like almost like the starter kit. It's like, okay, it's the generic version of the thing, and then you can lop on these extensions. So an example that I give in the master class is that you have a car object, and that car object, you can have just a regular car object, but then it can have extensions for flying car and underwater car. So you flying car gets like the little wing kit, and then there's information about it too in the system if it's a flying car versus an underwater car. And so we can say this particular car base can have 0 to 1 extensions. So this, if you remember object bases and derived objects, you'll be like, ooh, okay, I need to go back into that training, because this is a big upgrade, because now we can say for this particular design, you can have just a car, but you can also have a car that has a flying attachment or a car that has an underwater attachment. So that's the quick and dirty version of base objects and extensions. So tell me how that applies to Horizon Forbidden West.
So like I said, there's like you have your elemental types. So those elemental types are going to be like across weapons, they're going to be across machines, they're going to be across like human enemies. So like you want that type to be predictable, so that like that's you're basing an elemental system in your game on that. So when you might have a weapon as your base or a machine as your base, and that has everything that is both visible to the user and potentially important to the modelers. Like you've got sound bites attached to it. Like what does it sound like when it's walking? What does it look like? So you've got animators doing walk cycles. You've got modelers and like concept art. You have all of this other, like, what are all of the attributes? And so now, okay,
Uh-huh.
does this machine have an elemental type or not? If it doesn't, then it doesn't have any of the elemental attributes visually
Yeah.
on it.
Can
So
it have
like,
multiple elemental types?
no, I don't think
Okay.
so. Your weapons can,
Okay.
machines cannot.
Okay, so if you have a machine, so a machine, does it have to have an elemental type, or can you have a
No,
machine without? It doesn't have
you can
to. So
have,
it's had,
yeah,
so a machine has 0 to 1 elemental types.
yeah.
Ah,
And yeah.
gorgeous.
So like, and then if it does have an elemental type, then it's like, okay, which element? And
Hmm.
so if you have a frost element versus an acid element, they might have different textures on them. Like one, like you might have like balls on the outside, like
Hmm.
spheres that glow either green for acid or blue for ice, right? But the acid one might like have like some green corrosion on it, whereas like one might have like a frosty texture. So your model for one with an element might be the same across all. Like, so you have like the model you made in as a modeler of your little machine, And they have
Mm.
one for without an element and one for with an element. And then depending on the element is like which texture gets applied, so that someone from a different area of the studio would need to know what is which element. So like the modeler might only need to know whether it has an element or not, but now the painter or the texture artist is going to have to know which element it is. And that's important to the user or the player, because now they're able to decide from a distance without like they should be able to judge after time from distance without inspecting the enemy which elemental type, if it has one, it is, and where on the body those elemental weak points are.
Like, I'm guessing also, so you're thinking about this, which is super interesting. You're thinking about this from the game designer perspective
Yeah.
too, not just the game player perspective.
Yeah.
So you're thinking about the different roles, because that's what we do as OOUXers.
Yeah.
We're like, there's multiple roles involved here. I'm going to think about all of them. But also I'm imagining that like if a machine has the frost element applied to it versus the acid
Yeah.
element,
Yeah.
acid element, like it'll also have not just different, like it won't just look different, like it'll actually have different attributes.
Yeah. Like the acid versus frost is going to have different damage ratios too. There's a lot of like math and physics that comes in, right? So like a frost is going to like, so frost might be neutrally effective against acid versus like fire is twice as effective or 4 times as effective. And all of those attributes of that elemental relationship are part of that like elemental type object. So you could, what's nice about this is like as a game tester, you could go in and say, okay, we're going to test the elemental balance. And you could just do that with like little boxes. You don't have to build the whole machine to see the balance of acid versus frost. You can just play them in a simulation that's very, very small.
I feel like this would apply to so much game design. I mean, it's like I'm just thinking about other games, because I don't play video games, but I play board games and card games. But I'm thinking about like Stone Age is a game that I play, and there are resources. And there's the different types of resources. Like there's gold, there's, oh my gosh, clay, there's timber. And the different types of resources do have different attributes to them. And like they have different point values, but that you can do different things to them. They're also a tool. A tool works completely differently. They're all resources that you can get on the board, but
Yeah.
like tools work totally differently. So then what I would have is I was modeling this and trying to think it through and even explaining it to people. It's like, okay, you just have a bunch of resources. Let me tell you what resources are in general.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
this is, well, these resources are different than these resources.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it also applies to so many user experiences too, where you have something that you have like this like generic version of the thing, and that version may be able to become more specific through these extensions where it gets like these extra attributes. This is also getting into one thing that we had that's, I think this is only in the advanced masterclass, where we talk about using type and using extensions at the same time.
Yeah.
Which gets, I feel like we need diagrams for that. That's like not for a podcast,
Yeah,
but
I know.
they go together, right? So like things like a type, like there's the type, and that can say like, okay, this machine is of type frost. So it's going to have a bunch of conditional logic on like, okay, what is it going to look like? But then it's also going to get the frost, because it's of type frost, it's going to get the frost extension, which actually gives you more attributes.
Yeah. And like
Amazing.
all of this is like compounding into like, that's why those like maps or models I was making were like huge. Like you don't do those those are not for a Canvas software.
No.
Yeah, because you're
Canvas software
getting,
like Miro or something
yeah,
like
like
that.
no, because there's so much
It will
other
break.
stuff under the hood too. There's so much conditional logic when in games. Like if you really want to do an exercise in how do I define conditional logic and
Yeah.
OUX, like do model a video game or a board game or anything like that. And it's like, oh, I have all these attributes. Oh, wait, but this is only like, especially with video games, it's like, oh, I actually have an attribute for can I pick that up? Is that object pick upable or not?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what is an attribute of an object, any object in the system?
Would that
Any
not be
object
like
in the
a
world
conditional
that's pickable.
CTA?
Yeah. But also, like, you would want it represented on the
Right.
visible model
Model.
itself. So, like,
That's true.
what's different about a model that I can pick up versus a model that's just going to be knocked over if I step on it or something, or that's not going to
Amazing.
move at all if I interact with it.
I love this challenge. So anybody who's listening and you want to practice some OUX, just go try to do it for a video game or a board game and just say, okay, what are the objects here? How do those objects relate to each other? Then, what can somebody do to those objects and what are the attributes of those objects? And then when you get into those attributes, really start thinking about conditional logic. Do those attributes change based on some sort of condition? And that can be a really great exercise for you and fun too.
Yeah.
So you were talking about like how the level of detail, what are you using? Are you using Notion now? What are you using to do your documentation? Like at Autodesk?
Personally, so at Autodesk, we're using a combination of Airtable and FigJam and Miro.
Okay.
What we on my team are doing is still relatively new. We're still working it out, but we've been creating the artifacts and maintaining them. We just are still trying to work out how to scale, trying to keep up with it. And like the artifacts have been incredibly useful for our teams.
Tell me about, so you, for your leadership project, so everybody that goes to the advanced program has a leadership project, basically a gift that they give back to the community and they OUX that thing. And Mandi, you created some really amazing material on how to create a community of practice, which is something that you're still trying to do at Autodesk. And there's things that are working and aren't working. So before we sign off here, can you give, for anybody who's at a big company and is maybe like, man, like, is there anybody else using OUX here? Like, what kind of advice would you give them to kind of start bringing people together?
If there is that awareness at your company that like, if anybody else has talked about it, like, hey, do you know of anybody else here that's doing this? So we have a human-centered design group at Autodesk, and I reached out to them, and they actually didn't know about OUX, but were really excited about it. So like, because we have used heavily the Luma practices and a lot of other frameworks, but we want to give people more options and more things to look at because it's not one way isn't the only way. But I guess like my advice would be like, if there isn't anybody there, like find that person and make them.
Yeah.
I had to go through a couple workshops, but I finally found one person who was interested. But yeah, it was just reaching out and like not being afraid to poke people and like bug them like, hey, are you working on OUX? If not, like, do you know what it is? Or if you're trying to find those people, if whether or not they exist already, but you can always make them.
Yeah. Force them. No, don't force them.
Don't force them, but you can create OUXers from interested people.
Yes, which you have done. I think one of the interesting things that you talked about during your leadership project is like having grassroots as well as like top down and having both of them. I mean, of course, having both of those is the best way to do it, but then you kind of like top down help, which is kind of what we were doing with the Orca sprints, where we kind of like got leadership involved and like there was a big investment behind it. But then that can fizzle out if there's not a grassroots movement too. And then of course, if the grassroots movement isn't supported at the top, then that's like just becomes a really big uphill battle. So ideally you have like some grassroots effort and some leadership buy-in can like give you exponential return, right, on the work that you're putting into it versus like having even a lot of grassroots but no leadership support, or a lot of leadership support but no grassroots effort. You kind of want it like distributed.
Yeah, because the leadership support, like just in the nature of it, is going to be cyclical, right? Like they have a lot on their plate and they have projects, they have deadlines. So like if they're putting the money and the excitement into OUX, but it's based on a specific effort or a specific project, they can't maintain the hype because they have to move on. So your people, your grassroots have to maintain like the quote hype or the excitement or the like the actual desire and the actual work to do it. Right. So that's why leadership is helpful for getting that money, that like support, the time, the resources that you need. But the actual getting of the work done is all about the people around you. And like the ability to communicate with your teammates is huge. Like I think the biggest aid we have done in the past year is making more resources that are trying to meet our like traditional UX designers where they are, so that it's like, okay, what are some ways you can communicate? We can communicate to each other better. And so
Yeah.
that we can tell you what we're thinking and you can tell us what you're thinking, and we can speak the same language, but you don't have to be fluent in ours.
Yeah, yeah, because ours is a lot.
It's a lot, and
If
they
you
don't need
if
to
you haven't
know
picked
or
it up on
care.
it, yeah. Even just from this podcast, like trees and bases and extensions. Okay, this was so cool. I love the challenge that you gave folks to like go OOUX a video game and see how that goes. We'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes. So if anybody wants to reach out to you and ask you questions about that, Mandi is available on LinkedIn. And yeah, also join us in the OOUX forum, forum.OOUX.com. You can post your game design to the bulletin board, and we'd love to take a look at it there. Post an object map of your game design. Love to see that. And tag Mandi in the forum.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Happy OOUXing, everyone. And Mandi, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the UX Level Up podcast. If you want to connect with me, Sophia, please follow me on Instagram at SophiaVUX, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Sophia Prater. I'm pretty easy to find there. Our music was brought to you by Ruby Vell, courtesy of Sugaroo Records. Thanks again for listening.